The aircraft carrier's catapult has one job: to pull a 50,000-pound airplane from a standstill and accelerate it to a speed of 150 knots in under 3 seconds. There are currently two types of catapults in operation: steam-powered catapults, which have been around since the 1950s, and electromagnetic catapults that have only been in operation since 2017. The next question should be obvious.
Catapults, which is better?
Steam or electric? Ready? Steam. Electric. He works for the enemy.
I guess that settles the debate, except for Mr. President. You're aboard USS Wasp. It may look like an aircraft carrier, but it doesn't have catapults. Oh, and the guys you're pulling are Marines, not sailors who operate and maintain catapults. But why the US Navy switched from steam to electromagnetic catapults in the first place? And why, despite all the issues with this new technology, the Navy is reluctant to go back to steam is not what you think.
Would you go with steam or would you go with electromagnetic? Because steam is very reliable.
That was President Trump's conversation with the commanding officer of USS Ronald Reagan in 2018. And he's right. Steam catapults are indeed very reliable, with a 99.5% uptime. But they also have downsides and limitations. The biggest downside of a steam catapult is that you can't accurately control its power output. It's a bit like bungee jumping, where the ideal outcome is to hit the water under the bridge, very gently. But they don't have a bungee cord for every single weight. For example, anyone weighing 180 to 200 pounds is attached to the same bungee cord, and the operators then have to adjust the length according to each person's weight. But this is not a perfect science. Make the cord a little too long and they hit the water harder. Make it a little too short and you miss the water altogether. Safe, but way less fun. The steam catapult works similarly, in that the power output is adjusted based on the takeoff weight of the aircraft. That's why there's a person who confirms the takeoff weight with the pilot and the catapult officer prior to launch. But in contrast to bungee jumping, if the catapult output is less than required, you end up with a cold shot, and the airplane winds up in the water. So, as a form of insurance, the steam catapult is calibrated to produce a bit more power than is really required. This extra power comes at a cost of additional stress to the airframe, which translates to additional maintenance. But how come the power output of steam catapults cannot be set exactly to what's needed? American aircraft carriers are nuclear-powered, where the heat generated by the nuclear reactors turns water into steam. That steam does three big jobs. It spins the turbines that drive the propellers. It runs generators that power the ship's electrical systems, and a portion of it is routed through pipes that eventually make their way up to the cylinders that sit below the flight deck. After final checks, at a push of a button, steam pressure slams the pistons forward and drags the shuttle and the aircraft down the track. But this system lacks a feedback loop. Once the button is pushed, no adjustments can be made mid-launch, which can be problematic. For example, if there is a sudden reduction in the amount of wind over deck, steam catapults cannot account for it, hence the need for the extra insurance that we mentioned earlier. So why the switch from steam to electric?
They changed just for the sake of changing.
Or maybe it had something to do with drones. The US Navy has announced its plans to shift to a 60-40 split on its unmanned versus manned aviation assets by 2040. We're talking about a future where drones would accompany manned military aircraft on their missions to complement their armament, sensor suites, and other capabilities. As it turns out, electromagnetic catapults are just much better suited to launch these drones. Electromagnetic catapults, or EMALS, use electricity to create a moving magnetic field that drags the catapult shuttle forward. This system offers extreme accuracy because electricity gives much better power control than steam, and it also scales up much easier. Operators just need to set the precise desired end speed, and because EMALS has a closed-loop feedback system that continuously monitors the shuttle during launch, power adjustments can be done in real time to handle variables like changes in wind-over-deck speed. But it also gets rid of the steam jolt. The steam catapult requires high pressures just to move its massive internal piston, which causes an initial violent jolt at the start of the launch sequence. For heavier and reinforced airframes like the F-14 Tomcat and the F-A-18 Super Hornets, this may not be as big of a deal, even though there's still some stress on the airframe. But with UAVs, it's a different story. That initial jolt may be enough to damage more fragile drones. On the flip side, EMALS provides a smooth, gradual acceleration that replaces the initial hard jolt of steam and can accommodate much lighter UAVs. This reduction in peak stress on the airframe can extend an aircraft's service life by up to 31%. Although, as it turned out, EMALS' precise real-time adjustments also had unintended consequences. Testing in 2015 revealed that when a jet was carrying external fuel tanks, it would experience excessive airframe stress when launched with EMALS. It turned out that because the external tanks naturally jiggled during the launch, the EMALS computer would sense those tiny movements and try to adjust for them in real time. But instead, those adjustments created more vibrations. This problem was eventually fixed with a software update that told EMALS computers to chill out and ignore such tiny vibrations. This, in fact, is one of the biggest advantages of the electromagnetic catapult, the fact that its behavior can be fully customized by simply updating the software. In fact, China went directly from having ski jumps on their first two aircraft carriers to developing electromagnetic catapults for their third carrier, Fujian. France and India are also looking into EMALS technology for their future carriers. I should note that not all UAV launches are going to be dependent on EMALS. Lighter turboprop UAVs like the General Atomics Mojave can take off from an aircraft carrier without the extra pull of a catapult. On the other hand, heavier drones like the MQ-25 Stingray can be catapulted using steam-powered catapults. The Stingray has a maximum takeoff weight of around 44,000 pounds, comparable to the FA-18s. But President Trump wants to make aircraft carriers steam again.
We're going to use steam. I'm going to just put out an order. We're going to use steam.
That was during his first term in May 2019.
I'm going to do an executive order. I'm not going to let them continue to do this.
And this was in his second term in October 2025. But will the US Navy go back to steam? Replacing EMALS with steam catapults is not a simple retrofit. It's a complete redesign of the ship. Just to give you an idea, steam catapults rely on a massive network of high-pressure insulated pipes running from the belly of the ship, where the reactors are, all the way up to the flight deck, where the catapults are. None of that piping exists on the Ford class. In fact, all that real estate has been allocated for other purposes. Anything from ammunition storage to crew quarters. Plus, the A-1B reactors on the Ford class are optimized for electricity production, not just to run EMALS, but also to power newer technologies like directed energy systems, which are potentially one of the most suitable solutions to handle swarm attacks by cheap drones in a cost-effective manner. With all that said, in the fiscal year 2023-2024 test report, the Director of Operational Tests and Evaluation saw one failure out of every 614 EMALS cycles. This is far higher than the target levels of one failure per 4,166 cycles. That said, the US Navy says that they're measuring the reliability of EMALS by operational availability, not just how often they fail. If there is a failure during launch, but sailors can troubleshoot the EMALS relatively quickly, the Navy doesn't see that as a big problem. If you look at it that way, the Navy says EMALS operational reliability has been about 98% for its last 5,400 launches.